Good morning. Thank you. We will call today's Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderman Browning.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich. Alderman Aldrich. Chair Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderman Aldrich. One moment. STL TV, did you unmute the room? They may not be able to hear.
Can y'all hear me?
Now we can hear.
Can you hear Alderman
Hello? Can
Aldrich?
you hear me?
Thank you. Alderwoman
I don't
Sanier.
know if I can hear y'all.
We have 4 present. We have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, September 17th, 2024.
I move that we approve the minutes of Tuesday, September 17th, 2024.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderwoman Schweitzer and seconded by Alderman Browning that we approve the minutes from Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanier. Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
You are in the meeting now.
Alderman Cone, we're on the minutes. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderman Aldrich. Alderman Aldrich, we're on the approval of the minutes. Ms. Clark Hubbard, did you want us to wait? I see that he's on, but I'm not sure if he can hear.
Alderman Aldrich, can you hear us in the Kennedy room? It doesn't look like he's responding.
I think I can now. The
Okay.
sound just kicked out. I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear us
Present.
now? We're on
Yes, ma'am.
we're on the approval of the minutes.
Yeah, aye.
Chair Hubbard,
Aye.
we have 5 aye votes.
Thank you. With that, we've approved the minutes from Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. We have no board bills for review, no resolutions for review, so we were at now committee discussions. We would like to invite SLDC up for discussion item number 1.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hubbard, and thank you for the members of the HUS committee for the opportunity for you all today. Today, I would like to provide an update on the North St. Louis Small Business and Nonprofit Program. First, before I get started into the presentation, I would like to make a few key statements to address some of the committee's and the public's concerns about the perceived lack of transparency and integrity surrounding the North St. Louis Small Business and Nonprofit Program. Ensuring these funds are equitably, ethically, and efficiently dispersed to deserving North St. Louis businesses who are disproportionately impacted by the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic is SLDC's highest priority. The businesses and the neighborhoods that are critically important to this city of St. Louis. As the economic development arm for the city of St. Louis, SLDC seeks to create and sustain a business ecosystem that is healthy, diverse, and growing. This grant program represents an extraordinary opportunity for Black and brown businesses and nonprofits who have been previously overlooked, historically unable to apply for these funds, to have access to an unprecedented level of federal funding. From day one, SLDC has taken its responsibility of administering the first of its kind federally funded program, and we've taken that responsibility seriously. And as the president and CEO of the St. Louis Development Corporation, I deeply understand the importance of diligently deploying these federal resources to the most adversely affected neighborhoods in North St. Louis in a very timely manner. SLDC has been and will remain dedicated to managing this process with integrity and transparency until every dollar is allocated and dispersed and expended to qualified small businesses and nonprofit organizations. Administering a federally funded program of this magnitude is not a simple task. Not only is this the first time the St. Louis Development Corporation has managed a program of this size and scale, and the level of complexity to be able to deploy resources into businesses that have not received them historically. But it was also the first time for many of these members in these disinvested areas of our community have been invited to apply for grant funding that's at this scale of $33 million. Access to capital for entities operating in HUD qualified census tracts, which are census tracts in which the poverty rate is 25% or more, or the average median income is 60% of the area median income or below. This is what this program is aimed to benefit. It's often hard to come by these funding for these type of businesses. And through the Economic Justice Action Plan, we have outlined as a North Star and a core value, recognizing the injustices that have been done historically to Black applicants being denied mortgages and business loans and often being charged higher interest rates, which have led us to develop several programs and initiatives through the funds that have been appropriated and allocated to SLDC in partnership with the Community Development Administration. I would like to also state that while dollars have been sent to SLDC, we were not a direct allocatee. We have to work through the Community Development Administration for all of these resources. SLDC is a subrecipient of these resources, these federal resources, which means that as of the subrecipient agreement being completed between St. Louis Development Corporation and the Community Development Administration, the dollars are deemed obligated per Treasury guidelines prior to the deadline of December 31st of 2024, which allows SLDC the opportunity to expend these funds in partnership with beneficiaries through this small business program through September 30th of 2026 to ensure we meet the Treasury deadline of December 31st of 2026. But I also want to make sure that that the public and this committee is aware that SLDC understands that millions of federal dollars being infused into these businesses who are not typically in line for these resources, we have to make sure we do this the right way. We don't want to see these dollars clawed back or be under any additional scrutiny once we know an audit will be conducted on these programs. We want to have our processes documented and be able to address any concerns. That is why every action taken by SLDC has been in good faith in an effort to be stewards of these funds while keeping the best interests of the city and the applicants in mind. And although this program has been challenging, it also has presented the opportunities for SLDC to learn how to manage these programs moving forward and to share those key learnings with the public and also other city agencies as we continue to deploy these resources. So I'd like to share before the public today and before this committee some of the things that we learn as we are administering this program. One, the SODC, due to the organizational capacity that we had internally, went out and conducted a request for proposal to select a third-party consultant. Through that procurement process, we selected Grow America to conduct viability assessments and site visits, trusting that they would be able to conduct these assessments and conduct this work with minimum oversight by SODC. But now that we have seen some of the challenges and some of the feedback from the public as well as our internal review, we will ensure that the SODC compliance staff, led by Lorna Alexander, who is a seasoned and well-respected professional, will review and reevaluate all viability assessments and site visits that were conducted by third-party consultants. Following our internal review, our staff will resubmit all conditional awards for recommendation to the St. Louis Development Corporation's Board of Directors prior to dispersing any additional. Also, we would like to recognize that moving forward, it is imperative that we involve the St. Louis Development Corporation's Board of Directors throughout the process as we are assessing these viabilities. So as we move forward, SODC Board of Directors asking them to conditionally approve grant award prior to conducting that internal verification of the accuracy of the viability assessments performed by Grow America is a step that we would like to take moving forward, and a step that is important to build that trust and add additional oversight for the program. We also recognize it created confusion that could have been avoided by if SODC staff had vetted some of these third-party viability assessment reports before authorizing funding in a public meeting. Our aim was to provide updates to applicants who were seeking guidance on the status of their applications. Almost 3 years into what many of the businesses have experienced and provided feedback on, as well as our staff, has been an exhausting process for everybody. But we also understood the challenges facing business owners, and we wanted to make sure that they had the clarity on the status of their applications if they did not meet the scoring threshold for funding consideration, while also continuing to work with those businesses that had met that additional threshold to providing funding sources to support them as we move forward and verify their business was legitimate. And also based on feedback from the public, SODC has asked the City Councilor Office to provide a legal opinion where the conflicts of interest exist with respect to any disbursements of these grant funds. And based on that opinion, I am confident as the CEO of the St. Louis Development Corporation that we have the appropriate safeguards in place to prohibit any conflicts of interest and by requesting conflict disclosures from applicants and any board members. As an additional safeguard, SODC will be conducting an internal investigation to further concerns about any appearances of impropriety associated with this program prior to dispersing any further funds. As a matter of transparency, our goal has been and will continue to be transparent and supportive as possible of the applicants throughout the process. And to rebuild trust with the community, SLDC is committed to developing ongoing transparency reporting to the public. This will include releasing scores for all awarded applicants. We also will provide redacted applications and documentation that does not impact the competitive nature of the program or compromise sensitive information. And we will also share all conflicts of interest waivers signed by staff and board members as part of this program. And finally, we will at SLDC, through our compliance team, verify all viability assessments and site visits were conducted in an appropriate manner. And we will double check and triple check that information internally prior to taking this before our SLDC Board of Directors. Again, my goal is to provide this first iteration of our transparency reporting by the next SLDC board meeting on October 17th, 2024. I also want to note that this program is far from being complete, and we will have ongoing compliance monitoring requirements through September 30th, 2026 for those individuals that have been funded through this program. And I will go into greater detail in the presentation. I also want to mention that at this time, only $2.4 million. That's less than 10% of the over $33 million in conditional awards have been funded. And before dispersing any additional funds, SLDC is committed to completing this additional layer of due diligence to add more checks and balances before, again, dispersing those funds and taking them out of our stewardship. But I also want to note, again, that SLDC, by us having those conditional awards, it does not automatically qualify a business for funding. There are additional steps of verification that will be gone through. There will also be additional reporting requirements that will be appropriate for this process. And so I would like to go through a brief presentation to give context to the public around the timeline, the milestones, and an overview of the program, and then open it up to any questions from the board of directors.
Madam Clerk, do you have the presentation ready? Okay.
Yep, okay, thank you. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I want to take us back to 2021, July 9th of 2021. Program first was signed into ordinance. $37 million was allocated to this Community Development Administration to later dispatch and enter into a subrecipient agreement with SLDC for the purpose of deploying and administering this program. On June 1st, 2022, SLDC had received over 227 applications. That was prior to the program being paused for re-legislation. During that pause, there was an evaluation that was done around the program actually meeting the Treasury guidelines. Whether it was requiring a letter of support from the Board of Aldermen, but also ensuring that all businesses in North St. Louis qualified for the program and not just having them among specific corridors or portions of a corridor within North City. Upon that revised legislation being signed by Mayor Jones with effective date of August 12, 2023, SLDC moved forward on August 1st of 2023 with a new application. This new application provided the opportunity for these small businesses and nonprofits to submit information, whether they were part of the first 227 applicants or part of the new 500 applications that we received, to put forth their best effort around their budget, their timeline, their expenses, and their eligible costs. The deadline, initial deadline to apply was October 30th, 2020. Following the October 30th review timeline, our initial intake revealed many of our applications that we received were incomplete. So rather than deeming many of these businesses, again, that have first time applying for federal resources, deeming those applications as ineligible, SLDC offered a grace period to applicants, allowing them to resubmit missing information by December 15, 2023. Again, it wasn't about changing their application. It was ensuring that we had the appropriate budget, the appropriate information to properly assess and score these applications. With now more than 700 applications being received, by January of 2024, SLDC moved forward with conducting one-on-one phone calls, emails, and in-person meetings with each one of these applications to help them understand the grant agreement and funding information, to ensure that they were prepared to receive these funds. Again, because these are federal resources, and we understood that many of them, this was the first time taking part in this program. 500 applicants out of the 700 took part in a one-on-one session to review each application. We then had a final deadline to submit documentation for the competitive grants by April 15th to ensure that any budgets for the community enhancement or the community needs was submitted in a timely manner and an appropriate manner for us to review. You can go to the next slide, please. In that application, I want to note that we did not release the scoring rubric. However, we did within the application set forth the key priorities in which we were selecting these applications by, whether it was the geography of the business, does it actually meet a community need, and several other items within the application that will be released as part of our transparency reporting and will be shared with the public as well as with this board. We also shared in July 2024 a webinar that provided the evaluation criteria and the scoring rubric for all applicants so they can understand what the scoring process was throughout the process. And this was important because our goal was not to share how somebody could game the system. Our goal was to share what are the priorities that we are emphasizing through these grant awards. And so by ensuring that we shared the overview and the key priorities and not the scoring rubric, I think that was enough information for the businesses to understand what was being prioritized through this program. Subsequently, between August through September 2024, we held 30+ one-on-one community enhancement and facade improvement application debrief sessions. So every business who applied for the program that was unsuccessful had the opportunity to sit with the SLDC staff member, understand the scoring rubric, how their application scored against that rubric, and why or why not their business did not meet the threshold. So to date, I would like to give an update on the total dollars that we have funded to date. A total of 700. Go to the next slide for me. Thank you. A total of 700 applications again were received. Approximately 437 businesses have been awarded throughout the various program, the components of the program, which I will go to in just a second. Of that 33 million, again, less than 10%, only 2.4 million has been funded to date. On the next slide, you'll see an overview of the grant programs. The Capacity Building Program provided Financial Assessment and Technical Assistance Academy. These were $5,000 grants. These grants for those applicants who completed a financial assessment and participated in a Technical Assistance Academy received that $5,000. We also provided stabilization grants, grants for small businesses and nonprofits to be able to stabilize their operations. This was given on a first-come, first-served basis, and it was $15,000. Every business who applied through the program that is an eligible business could qualify immediately for this $15,000. So without even going through the competitive programs, businesses could have been awarded $15,000 through the stabilization grant and an additional $5,000 for the capacity building grant. We thought this was imperative to create a fair and equitable process for those small businesses who did not have the capacity to complete this program. We also provided operational expansion grants. These were grants for small for-profit and nonprofit businesses from an operational perspective to cover payroll, FF&E. But we also had community enhancement and community needs. These are for our larger brick and mortar projects. This includes facade improvements, site rehabilitation, and construction. Community needs was a component of the community enhancement program. And these were grants for small for-profit and nonprofit organizations that may be new to a neighborhood, but providing an amenity to that area. You think about a grocery store or a healthcare facility or a daycare facility. I think it's important to note that on the community enhancement, that project did not need to be completed prior to them submitting this application. However, they need to have improved some form of site control. That site control includes ownership of the property, a lease in the space of the property, but also having an agreement with their landlord to be able to make appropriate upgrades based on the budget that they provided in their application. Go to the next slide. Okay, you already did. So the next slide talks about the supplemental support grants. I have personally met with many of the businesses that have been impacted and have gone through this program since 2021. And based on their feedback, the businesses did not meet the initial scoring threshold. They mentioned to me that they diverted time from the operations of their business, from the management of their services, from going out to procure and secure new business opportunities. They forgone those opportunities to take part in this process. Understanding, again, this is these small businesses, many of them, their first time applying for federal resources. It was imperative that we created another program where they were able to receive a supplemental support grant if they were unsuccessful due to them not meeting that scoring threshold. And again, these businesses still have to be viable operating businesses in North St. Louis. And we will conduct those viability assessments and those site assessments in partnership with our consultant, but again, providing more oversight at SODC through our compliance team. And among these various programs, we broke the $33 million allocated to us among these 4 key areas. You can go to the next slide, which is $2 million for capacity building grants, $1.5 million for stabilization, $6 million for the operational expansion, and then the $23 million for community enhancement. I want to note the community enhancement and community need grants were the larger brick and mortar projects. These were the projects that not only impact that individual business, but impact the services that are provided to those neighborhoods that were disproportionately impacted by. So many of these nonprofits, these small businesses, it was about supporting their new development, but also ensuring that new development provided the ancillary services that was missing in that community. On the next slide, you'll see the funding that has been completed to date among the various programs. $687,500 for the capacity building grants, $1 million for the stabilization grants, and just under $1 million of $765,000 for operational expansion grants. On the operational expansion grants, I would like to note the businesses that have received these funds, the most that they have received is $25,000 to date. And the reason is many of the businesses, the way that we scored the process, if a business has between 1 and 5 employees, they receive $25,000. 5 to 10 employees, they receive $50,000. And then we have it on increments going and increasing up to 125 employees. Every business that had deemed they only have 1 of 5 employees, many of them were sole proprietorship. And they were able to provide evidence that they are an owner and a worker of that company. So therefore, they were deemed to have 1 of 5 employees. Any business that has more than 5 employees is required to provide their tax payroll documents dating back to 2023. And if a business have eligible uses all the way back to 2021, those can be used for this operational expansion grant. Also want to note on the community enhancement, businesses could qualify for community enhancement and operational expansion. So we had some businesses that applied for a community enhancement grant that were opening stores or opening new developments in North St. Louis, but also needed operational expansion dollars to be able to help with the administrative support. Part of this program and part of the clarity that's needed around this is to ensure that people understand the operational expansion funds will not be deployed to those businesses who are also receiving community enhancement until that project is in full operations. So if we have a new business locating in North St. Louis for the purpose of meeting a community need, that operational expansion grant will not be funded until they can show proof that they have payroll and eligible expenses at the property in which they are receiving the community enhancement grant for. And so we will hold those funds back until that assessment is conducted. To date, $0 has been funded through that program as we conduct the viability assessments, as well as the supplemental grants, $0 funded to date. So we will move forward again with the transparency report and submitting that additional information prior to funding any of these awards. I also wanted to note that we were pretty equitable and across all wards associated with this program. Sorry, Alderman Browning. I know you're a little bit lower than the list, but only a small sliver of your ward was actually eligible in North St. Louis City. But as you can see, businesses, the number of businesses that have been awarded by ward and the total dollar amount. Again, these are just conditional awards. They still need to get viability assessments and other verification done. And the last thing I want to hit is the additional due diligence that will be done on the back end for this. Even after we get through the funding process, there's additional compliance requirements that have to be conducted. You can go to the next slide for me. So each grant, again, will have its own level of due diligence that will meet the Treasury guidelines and also ensure that we are reviewing their proposed budgets and define project completion, and that all invoices actually match those requirements. I also want to note on the next slide that any community enhancement grant for over $1 million will have to adhere by Ordinance 70767 and 71094. So as I've come before this HUD's committee before about projects that SODC has approved, any tax abatements or tax incentives with the value over $1 million, that these projects have to adhere to these requirements. We have the capacity from our WMBE team that it stands ready to be able to work with these small developers, these small businesses, to help them understand these requirements and also ensure that they're able to meet the WMBE goals and prevailing wage goals associated with projects over $1 million, and that monitoring will continue to be conducted as they complete their project. I will read through these next couple slides. You have them here. We'll make sure that they're available for the public, but I want to make sure that we create time for questions or comments. But again, the capacity building grant, as you can see here, some of the requirements that are needed to be met by every applicant to ensure that they meet the eligibility and our reporting that needs to happen. Again, the key piece is that the business is operating in North St. Louis City, that they have a valid license with the license collector office, and due to the legislation passed by Alderwoman Sanier through the TADA bill, all their taxes, water bills, et cetera, need to be verified before we complete this funding or award this funding. So all of those requirements are put in place before we conduct any of those award fundings to those projects. We also have the stabilization grants that have to go through a similar process, and then the operational expansion grant. So if a business, for example, receives a $25,000 grant for operational expansion, they have to report on a semi-annual basis their employee payroll until those funds are expended. I would like to say we have an agreement in place through our beneficiary agreement, through our grant agreement with this program, that if a business is not able to share that information, then SODC has the legal rights to go after those funds from that business. Again, they will have to continuously send their employment or any other eligible costs on a semi-annual basis until all funds that they have been awarded or funded have been expended in accordance with the grant agreement that is in place. I also want to note on the due diligence for and compliance for the community enhancement, it is even more diligent as we require, and I'll go through a couple slides here. Keep going for me. One more slide. Thank you. We have, because these projects for community enhancement are brick and mortar, we will put a deed of trust on those properties, similar to what we do with the facade program or other projects that are brick and mortar associated with any public funds. We also will have a land use restrictive agreement and a dispersing agreement. It is also need to be noted here that these funds will not go directly to these businesses. We will have a dispersing agent for all of our brick and mortar projects to ensure that all invoices have been reviewed and are assessed to ensure that they meet the budget that they initially sent over to us. So that dispersing agent will not disperse those funds until they have sign off from SLDC, as well as them reviewing that information themselves, and then the funds are dispersed to that business. We also have other compliance requirements that will be shared as part of that transparency report. But to ensure these projects are able to move forward, we are in advance providing up to 50% of the project to move forward to be able to start their construction. But we also, again, will have that dispersing agent in place. We will have the appropriate verification, the viability assessments, and ensuring that the CBI clearance is met before any funds, again, are dispersed to that business. And then also that additional due diligence will come from the WMBE compliance team. All funds will be held with the exception of 5 to 10% for final disbursement until the project has been completed. We define a project being completed as the certificate of occupancy has been received and all final paid invoices and receipts have been verified. Again, I just want to note that we have a long process still underway over the next 2 years to ensure that every business that we fund that receives federal funds through the stewardship of SLDC is viable. When the applicant submitted their information, they entered and attested that they did not, that everything that they entered was true and accurate. And it is our job now to monitor that information as we are going through our ongoing reporting period for those projects that have already received funds, and to ensure that as we move forward, we add an additional layer of diligence and oversight from SLDC staff. So with that, I would like to open it up to questions from the directors. I would like to say, I know there's been questions about specific businesses. I may or may not have that information readily available about all 700 applications today. But if you have follow-up questions, please feel free to share those with me.
Thank you so much. We'll begin with questions. Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Director Richardson, for participating today and for the very thorough presentation. I am curious, we've seen, I think everyone has seen the media reports, so I prefer to just kind of address some of those things head on. The applications that have apparently been for vacant properties, empty buildings, vacant lots. Can you just elaborate a little bit on why those are being reported?
Yeah, so I would say, one, if it's a community enhancement project for a vacant building that will be restored, right? So the part of the community enhancement program is for that vacant lot or that vacant building to be redeveloped. We have also, through our follow-up with many of these businesses, have went back and verified the actual application for where the business has submitted the information for. So, for example, we had some businesses that were headquartered outside of North St. Louis City that used their headquarter address on the application and not entered the actual address where the funds were going to. That was embedded within the application itself. And so it was an error on our part by publicizing those incorrect addresses that may have created confusion. So again, we had some businesses that had addresses that, again, were outside of the city limits that may have had some incorrect addresses on the specifics of where the actual funds were going. And so we've cleared up many of those address discrepancies in the latest round of publications of the conditional awards. So that's where a lot of those challenges came. I would say the application could have been more clear on the front of it around the where the grant award business address was going to be, and not just putting business, the name of your business address. So I think there was some confusion, and again, a learning opportunity for ODC.
And in a situation where you have a vacant building or a vacant lot that's being developed by a business for their future location, are these grant funds being matched by the business, and is there a requirement for that, or is this the city just giving them, carte blanche, all the money that they requested, and there's no quote unquote ownership on the part of the business to put money in upfront in the project as well?
So there was no requirement put forth in the legislation and put forth in the subrecipient agreement that required a match from a business on any funds that we put in place. As we were assessing the viability of that business being able to complete that project, we looked at the budget, we reviewed the sources and uses, and if the grant funding request amount was unable to be able to complete the project, we immediately said that this project is ineligible. We also had some businesses that applied for $5 to $6 million of funding specifically for their vacant building or to help expand their operations. And to ensure that we created enough opportunity for businesses and also create enough impact where major projects can be completed, we capped the community expansion at $2 million. And so part of our one-on-one conversations with these businesses is to say, you applied for $5 million or $6 million in grants, but you're awarded $1 million through this community enhancement. Where are these other sources going to come from for you to complete this project? And if they say they don't have the availability to conduct that and complete that, then those grants will be rescinded, and then they will be reallocated to the next business that scored the highest in that process. And so that is part of the diligence that we're doing on this, but there was no requirement for matching funds. What I will say, though, is many of the projects that we funded through the community enhancement were financially impactful projects for that neighborhood. We awarded approximately $23 million through that program. We anticipate, based on the budgets that were received, over $150 million of total investment in these neighborhoods due to that investment of $23 million. And that's $150 million of investment going into North St. Louis City that will help meet the needs of that community. So we did take that into account as we were completing the review process, but it was not a requirement from any of the legislation or within the application itself.
And, one of the other, stories that's been circulating has been, the selection process and any, influence that might have happened with respect to elected officials or donors or, people in the kind of more influential situations.
Yeah.
Can you speak to how SLDC reviewed these applications? Was there a blind selection process? Was there, can you just help us to understand what that review process looked like, and how did you, mitigate, or did you mitigate, those types of circumstances?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Alderman Cone, because SODC, again, that's why we requested that legal opinion, just to ensure that we had the proper safeguards in place to mitigate any conflict of interest through our normal processes, board of director or any staff. So first and foremost, every SLDC board of director has to submit and complete a conflict of interest form. That if they have any conflicts, they have to recuse themselves and not have any influence in the process, as well as any appearance of impropriety. Those things have been all completed by all of our SLDC board of directors. When a St. Louis Development Corporation or Community Development Administration staff member participates in the review of any applications, they personally have to complete a conflict of interest form specifically for that program. And so we will, again, share that information through our transparency reporting to show the employees actually completing that participated in the program, as well as our board of directors through that process. So we ensure that, as you know, we had I would say, a subjective and objective view on how we selected these projects. I will use the community enhancement and community need as an example, because that is, I think, the one that is most in question, because those are the highest dollar amount. So the first filter that we did was the completeness and eligibility review. The second was based on the economic justice alignment filter. So the geographic priorities was 0 to 50 points. The first 10 points was based on the economic justice index area 5, ranging from an economic justice index area 1 receiving 10 points, all the way down to an economic justice index area 5 receiving 2 points. We also reviewed on the demonstration area around Walnut Park, Project Connect, MLK Corridor, and Dutchtown. We also wanted to ensure that we provided additional points for businesses that either individuals who owned the business lived in North St. Louis City or had a headquarter in North St. Louis City.
Can I just interject real quick?
Yeah.
You mentioned Dutchtown.
No, they're not part of this, but it's part of the demonstration. So that was
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, Dr. Rincon. You're correct. They had to be one eligibility review, or they're in North St. Louis City.
Right.
So do they meet the eligibility?
I just want to make sure
Yes.
that we're clear.
Yes, I got you.
Thank you.
And then the North St. Louis residency, again, does the applicant reside or have a headquarters? They receive 5 points. What is the proximity to the corridor? Again, when the original ordinance, the spirit of the program was passed was about commercial corridor revitalization. If they're on a corridor, they receive 10 points. If they're within 500 feet of a priority corridor, they receive 5 points. What are their proximity to a community asset, an occupied school, a MetroLink, or a park? If they're within 500 feet of either one of those, they receive 5 points. And then the final piece was the application review. Was the applicant a women or minority-owned business entity or a nonprofit? They receive 5 points. And then the community amenity component is 10 points. Does the project actually provide an amenity such as a healthcare facility, educational facility, grocery store, et cetera? And then we also had 5 points for projects that provided residential services such as a barbershop or salon, restaurant, retail, nonprofit. And then we wanted to ensure the project proposal and request was completed, and did they have a reasonable budget? Again, for many of these projects, their budgets were disproportionately higher than what you would expect for this type of program or what we had awards to fund. But also wanted to note that this was focused on the geographic areas and the places that were most disproportionately impacted by COVID. And that's why the geographic priorities were created. There was also an economic justice impact evaluation that was conducted, Alderman Cone, by 9 individuals, 7 from CDA and 2 from SLDC. And we had every application that went through the competitive process rated by 3 individuals separately. And then they scored each one of those based on the financial feasibility of the project, the qualifications of the project. Does the project meet primary goals, such as strengthening the neighborhood, eliminating the wealth gap, improving health and educational outcomes, expand the tax base and grow the city population? And does the project demonstrate a positive impact on community needs? We understand that these are objective, right, criteria. And that's why we had 3 separate reviewers from CDA and SLDC review each one of these applications, and then we aggregated those scores and provided an average. And so based on that average, if the applicant met a certain threshold, they would then go into the final executive review. And that's when the executive, such as myself, my senior vice presidents have the opportunity to review those applications and provide final funding recommendations that went to the board. And so this was 100% focused on the initial viability assessment that was provided to us by the consultant Grow America, but then also reviewing the application itself. We did not, again, this is where I talked about at the beginning, we did not have the opportunity to go to every business prior to taking their funding recommendation to our board to make sure that they would be able to spend those funds. For example, having that one-on-one conversation with the business, say you applied for $3 million, well, you got awarded for $1 million. How do you plan to close that gap? Our goal was to put forth those funding recommendations as conditional awards to our SODC Board of Directors. They would then provide a conditional approval that we then were going to bring back to our SODC Board of Directors once we're able to confirm and verify that information. The challenge and the confusion came from is us sharing that information publicly because we're in a public meeting at SODC Board of Directors, and then the public are saying, well, how did they get awarded? They're not, located here, they're not viable, these things. So that's additional oversight that we will do moving forward to ensure that all of our I's are dotted and T's are crossed before final approval comes before the board. I am confident in our scoring criteria. However, there is additional oversight that needs to be done before funding is approved by the SODC Board of Directors, and that's part of our ongoing transparency reporting. And not another dollar will leave the hands of SODC until that information is conducted and that transparency report is completed. I hope that answered your question.
It does. It helps illuminate a little bit here. I am curious, though, as well. So I think I saw there were 400 plus applicants for one of the programs.
Yeah, community enhancement, maybe.
Community enhancement program. So as you go through and evaluate those based off of the corridor demonstration projects, EJI, proximity to community assets, and then applicant status as a MB, WB, et cetera, they are then given the conditional award,
right?
And then from there, they go through another review process. Correct. But at what point are they receiving funding, and at what point do we determine the viability? So let's say we award someone, $500,000 for redevelopment of a vacant lot in North St. Louis. That $500,000 wasn't what they asked for. They asked for $1.5 million, and able to make a $500,000 grant. Right. And so they said that they would be able to do it. They aren't able to do it, and here we are, and let's say 2026, because the funding has to be spent basically by 2026. What happens at that point? Where are the checks and balances to make sure that the city would still have the opportunity to pull that back and reutilize those funds, either in the program for other applicants or reappropriating it down here at the Board of Aldermen? Yeah,
definitely. So that's where the semi-annual reporting comes in. So every applicant who receives funding. So after the conditional awards are being met, my staff with Lauren Alexander goes back and conducts the final viability assessment, ensuring that, again, the site is accurate, the budget is correct, that they're able to expend the funds by September 30th of 2026, that they have the sufficient resources to complete the project, and then they are required to submit their ongoing reporting. For operational expansion, they have to submit payroll expenses or other FF&E expenses and eligible expenses that they've incurred to date for us to release them from any future obligations from SLDC as it relates to that program. For the brick and mortar projects, that's why we have the deed restriction, the LURA in place to ensure that we actually at that point have financial rights to that project for those grant proceeds. As they are submitting those semi-annual reports, we will be able to understand the progress of their construction. And so we will be checking in with each one of those businesses semi-annually until they are able to show that they have either expended the funds or can continuously show that they can expend those funds prior to September 30th, 2026. And again, I can't stress this enough. As we're having these conversations with businesses, we express this concern, this requirement to each one of them. Not just the need for them to expend the dollars by 2026, but for those larger projects over $1 million, the additional scrutiny that's required based on the ordinances that are in place and working through a dispersing agent to make those things happen. So we will have the ability to claw those funds back and redisperse them because they will not be dispersed out of that dispersing agent until they can verify dollars are being deployed in the appropriate way.
I don't think I'm alone with this concern, but I think when you have programs in place like this and we get to a point, there has to be some kind of nexus point where we say, you know, the money in this program is basically allocated and, you know, we're at a juncture where reappropriating it within the program is not going to be a viable alternative in order to get, you know, the money spent in time for these deadlines. So are you all backing into a time frame with respect to that? I get that you want to do the semi-annual reports, but that's every 6 months. Semi-annual is every 6 months.
Yeah, so Lorna, do you want to speak to that? Yeah, because she's managing that process for us in an ongoing way. So I just want to make sure Lorna can get the opportunity to express exactly how that process works.
I just, you know, we're here at the end of 2024, and so we've got next year basically that we need to, and we'll only get 2 updates next year, right? So how are we making sure that we're going to deploy all of these dollars and utilize them at the end of the day?
So, good morning, committee members. I'm
sorry, ma'am. Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Lorna Alexander. I'm the program compliance for the St. Louis Development Corporation. In response to the question from the alderman, the biggest concern, of course, is the biggest award on the community enhancement side. So immediately after the awards were posted, the 45 recipients of those awards received a communication to schedule a one-on-one session with two of the members on the housing side. One of them has the 21 or 22 businesses that are receiving the facade improvement awards of $100,000 each, and the other one, the larger awards. And so during that one-on-one session, what the SLDC staff member is going over with the business is, as Neil mentioned, hey, you asked for $1 million, your award is $500,000. How are you going to spend it? Do you still have a viable project? And they gave them a deadline to respond with a viable project and a revised scope of work based on that award. So we will know probably by the end of October at the latest, because I think those individual deadlines are coming up, whether or not they have a viable project going forward or whether we need to reallocate those funds.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Just as one point of clarity, so as we were going through the one-on-one debrief with every business that were scored through the process, they had the opportunity to be reconsidered if they feel as though their application was not appropriately scored. And we have a reconsideration process that we have shared, we have published online. And to your point, Alderman Cone, as we have more resources that are deployed back into the program, we will let those businesses know when we have funds available to award them as they're being reconsidered too.
Okay. I don't want to overuse my privilege of seniority here with questions. I'll kind of defer my time to some of my other colleagues who might have questions as well. Thank you.
Alderwoman Slicer.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Alderman Cohen asked a lot of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Richardson, Director Richardson, for being here. I think what my constituents want to know is what happened, how it happened, what's the solution to make sure nothing that shouldn't be happening with taxpayer dollars is happening. So what happened? You're saying there's $2.4 million that has actually had checks written.
Yeah.
How much of that money do you expect went to people, businesses that shouldn't have received it, wouldn't meet the requirements? And what is the solution for the money of that has gone out the door?
Yeah. So the majority of those businesses, the first round of that 227. And through that first 227 businesses that applied, we did a lot of the viability assessments, the verification of those businesses. What we will do, as part of this transparency reporting, is go back and double check and confirm every one of those awards that have been funded to date to make sure they qualify. What I will say, though, is every project, when they were funded, we had a funding agreement that said that they attested to everything within that application was accurate. And if anything within that application is inaccurate, they would have to rescind that grant or send those funds back to SODC because what they had listed is not aligned with what was eligible for the program. So we made sure that every applicant that was awarded funds out of that 2.4 million not only went through a one-on-one session, but also we had a workshop in which was led by Lorna with each one of those businesses, helping them understand the grant agreement, understanding the funding agreement, and what was required to be reported on a semi-annual basis. And so if the business that has been funded is not able to produce the invoice associated with, again, the eligible costs that are laid out within their budget, then we would have legal recourse for them to return those funds back to SLDC to be dispersed to businesses that are eligible through the program. I am pretty confident that the majority of those first grants, again, were those smaller dollar amounts for capacity building, technical assistance. These businesses had to attend, workshops, had to complete financial assessments in order to qualify for these funds. So I'm pretty confident in that. I don't know if, Lorna, you have anything else to add because you met with many of those businesses and provided that workshop for those first sets of funds that have been released.
Right. So I think what's important to know is that when we engaged with Grow America and they completed under their agreement with us or their partnership with us, they completed the viability assessments of the initial 227 applicants. So they went on to sign those folks up for the Technical Assistance Academy and to conduct the financial assessment. So we felt pretty confident that the viability assessment visit was completed and approvable. So we didn't concern ourselves initially with those completed viability assessments. Now, with all the investigative reporting, we should have spent a little bit more time looking at them. I, like Neil, feel pretty confident because a lot of folks have looked at all of the businesses that have received awards. And so far, maybe 2% of them have come back to us. And we probably have explanations, as with the address given is not the address of the business, but the address of maybe the property that they're going to approve. So I think we're at 2% that we need to dig further into. And I'm pretty sure of that 2%, maybe 1% of them might have been people, I know I stopped calling them bad actors, I call them businesses who were trying to take advantage, of an opportunity that they needed. And so when they sat down with us after 2 years of going through this application process from 2022 till March and April of 24, when we conducted those one-on-one sessions, none of these businesses said at that time to us, hey, my business has closed. I'm here, but my business has closed. Actually, 1 or 2 did, and we told them they weren't eligible for fundings. Others, though, still on paper, looked like a viable business. They had a St. Louis City business license. They were registered with the Secretary of State. They had proof of the site address, whether it was a utility bill. So they move forward in the process with a completed viability assessment on file for them. Going forward, we're going back to look at all the viability assessments that Grow America conducted. I think starting in March, we switched our partner who's doing the viability assessments to Morgan Graves. So they're going out to do the viability assessments on the additional 500 applications, right? And as they submit those reports to us, and we started this process before all the newspaper coverage, we are looking at then and approving those reports based on the information that they provided. So I feel pretty confident that everyone after March of 2024, the viability assessments completed, they're a viable business operating out of the address they put on their application. Those going back to 2022, they might have been viable in 22, and the process has been so long, they might have shuttered by that time. And like I said, just forgot to tell us. So, but we're going to go back and do that due diligence.
Okay. So the rest of the money, about 35 million.
30. So a portion of the funds were allocated for administrative support for this program.
So the amount that we're talking about,
33.
33.
Yep, 33.
Okay, so the other 33 million has not had any checks written
Exactly.
to date. Okay. And what has happened so far is that with some of the other ones, and some of them have not been funded yet at all, but some of the other businesses, there's been a presentation of those businesses, but there hasn't been an official award, or there's been a conditional award and a presentation.
Yeah, there's been
official.
Yes.
I'm trying to get it, the process as clear as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So in June, at the end of June of this year, we provided, again, we were getting, continuous communication from the public around cities just sitting on this money, SODCs just sitting on this money. We need to know what the status of our application is, whether if we're unsuccessful, tell us we're unsuccessful so we can move forward. If we are successful, what additional information is needed in order for us to get access to the funds that we were awarded. So our goal in that late June meeting, I believe it was June 28th or June 27th, was for us to announce those conditional awards, to be as transparent, as open as possible, because we know that there was additional diligence that was going to be required that can be conducted prior to us actually funding those awards, and then being able to communicate to those businesses that were initially deemed unsuccessful, letting them know, hey, this was the clear scoring rubric that you were scored on, and this is how you didn't meet it, and then they could move on in the process.
So, Director, for the ones that have been pointed out to us as potentially problematic, those are there are a few of them that are they've received sort of conditional approval, but they are still going through the process.
So we had some businesses that, and I think this is part of the challenge. So we had 700 applications in total. Out of those 700 applications, only 465 or 500 of them were actually deemed eligible. So the ones that we initially knew, like off the bat, that they were not eligible, they were taken out. They were communicated to that they were not eligible for the program. They were ineligible for the program. We sent the communication out to those businesses. So then as we moved forward in the process, we scored the applications that were deemed qualified, that would qualify for the program. We assessed them, and then we took them back before the SODC Board of Directors and said, these are the ones that we like to conditionally award at the end of June, and these are the ones that are unsuccessful.
So B thing.
Exactly.
These are the ones that we would like to conditionally award. These are our next.
But we did not present the businesses that were unsuccessful.
Okay.
We just presented before the SODC Board of Directors the businesses that were deemed to meet the scoring threshold, and we had availability to fund. And then we wanted to move forward with conducting that additional assessment and analysis, have those one-on-one conversations with the businesses to ensure they understand what's in their grant agreement, what's required. Does the dispersing amount actually able to help you complete the project, or is it not sufficient by September 30th, 2026? And if not, then we need to rescind your award and reallocate it. We've had several businesses, as Lorna has spoken to, that we've done that additional viability assessment check that fell off of the list.
Okay.
I don't have that list in front of me, but there were several that
And
fell
are
off.
those the same that have been pointed out as potentially problematic, or are those?
But some of them are. I don't have the.
And we're in a situation here where sometimes there might be a vacant building or property that is part of it that is eligible because they're trying to
Correct.
fix it up, and
Correct.
that's the whole point
Correct.
of the program.
Correct.
So you have some things that may look at first like a very big problem for receiving funding, to when you look at their application, it's
Exactly.
known it's a
Well,
vacant. I mean, I'm just trying to untangle what was presented into the public, sphere for information, and how that affects what money has gone out the door, will go out the door, changes any criteria you're doing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so based on again, I don't want to quote because I'm not a legal attorney, but based on some of the sunshine legislation and legalities, we are not required to share the application prior to us finalizing negotiation of the contract or grant agreement with the business, especially in a competitive program. However, it does allow for us to do so. And so given now that the confusion has elevated to, we need to know more about these applications that's being funded, as part of our transparency reporting that we will provide before our October 17th board meeting, we will go back and produce every conditional award, specifically for the community enhancement pieces that we upload a redacted application that has all of the information about the project itself, what they've been awarded, and what they're going to use the funds for prior to us funding those projects. So we have the discretion to share that information, and I think it's in our best interest to be transparent with the public, but we will have to redact some of the business sensitive information before we share that with the public.
But the public will know who's receiving the money and what
Exactly.
it's for.
Yes.
And be able to do any research that they wish about those businesses and
100%. Yes.
And in terms of the larger grant amounts, are they going out in pieces or?
Yeah, so I noted that in the presentation that up front, we want these businesses to get activated. And so we're going to deploy 50% of the funds up front, but we will have a deed of trust placed on that project for those larger brick and mortar projects. And then also a land use restrictive agreement within that grant agreement as well. So we'll have the appropriate documents in place before we even disperse the first 50%. And I also want to note, again, they will have a dispersing agent. So it's not as though we're taking money directly from SLDC account directly into this business account. They have to go to the dispersing agent, make sure that there's eligible expenses that are approved by SLDC, and then they get those additional funds to complete the project.
Right, and I appreciate it and think that having a third-party verification is really important. It's just making sure that, a third-party consultant was doing the reviews, and if anything was missed, I mean, it's not on them, it ends up on the city.
Yeah, I agree.
That's whose responsibility it is at the end of the day to make sure that everything is built above board in a way that meets all requirements set forth by the federal government. And so, you mentioned that in terms of SLDC also reviewing it and strengthening some of those procedures that were in place. I think what I always worry about is, okay, well, what if none of this was called to question? What would have happened? Where would we be? And how do we prevent that any sort of issues from occurring?
Yeah. So that's why we had a conditional awarding process and not moving forward directly into funding these projects. We still had a process for vetting those businesses, to having those conversations with those businesses about their application and ensuring that we had those other requirements in place. Even after we fund these businesses, there's still scrutiny that's placed on these funds. They still have to provide the semi-annual reporting. We still have the dispersion agreement in place, and this was in place with or without this additional scrutiny placed on the program itself. These were requirements for the application and the grant agreement before these questions were raised. So we already had those checks and balances in place before, anything was called into question. So I am confident and comfortable that we would have caught many of those who, as Lorna stated, were seeking to benefit from the program, and this was not the appropriate one for them to benefit.
Right. I mean, it throws the entire program into question if you
Exactly.
have people who are willing to do that.
You're correct.
Yeah, and there's too many problems to add
I
that
agree.
to the mix. I'm sure I'll think of more questions, but I'll cede my time to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Alderman Brownie.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for the good questions so far. I appreciate the answers that you've been willing to provide as well, Director Neal. I wanted to just kind of start off with, we could call it the elephant in the room. The Post-Dispatch story from September 9th, St. Louis politicians' relatives are in line for big grants, city won't release the records. So what I'm hearing from you today is that you are planning to release some of those materials as part of a transparency measure. You're not required to, but you are planning to.
Right. Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then let's just address the first part of that, St. Louis politicians' relatives in line for big grants. I understand that Alderwoman Clark Hubbard recused herself during the meeting to discuss the issuance of these grants. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so she did not vote on those grants.
That's correct.
Did Alderwoman Clark Hubbard participate in the evaluation or decisions whatsoever of the awarding of these grants?
No, she did not.
Okay, I'm glad we cleared that up. For the record, I want to state that, while she does share the name Clark Hubbard, the Hubbards own a lot of housing in Carr Square, and that these grants that you were issued to that organization, the Carr Square Tenant Management Organization, they are intended to rehab those units so that people can live in them. Is that correct?
I'll have to go back.
I realize I'm asking about a specific
but
I'm just trying to provide the context here.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we know that there's a lot of need in North St. Louis, and there's no doubt that some of these awards are needed in their communities. So as we discuss this, I just want to make sure we do so with context. I also want to acknowledge that the process was delayed by 3 years because of, I'm just going to be honest, politics. And it put SLDC in a position where they had to move quickly to get this money out so it could be spent by the deadline for this money that has a deadline. So obviously it's all of our interest to make sure this money gets to where it needs to go to actually meet that need that exists. And when there's some doubt about the process used to vet those awardees, it casts doubt on the rest of the awardees as well, which is, a really negative effect for this money that's supposed to go to address these needs. My question for you is, I'm glad that we acknowledge that there are some holes in this and that maybe there's some cleanup to be done, but we are on a tight timeline here, and I'm a little worried about what that looks like. So can you expand a little bit on the timeline for reevaluation?
Yeah, so right now we are going back and reviewing all of the viability assessments, site assessments been conducted by NDC, Grow America, for all of the conditional awardees. What will be the next step is at our October viability assessment that have been completed and verified and updated by our SODC compliance team. And then we will also provide a redacted application for each one of those businesses, and then the score that each one of those received for those respective programs. That will be submitted as part of our board consideration, and then also ensuring that that's shared in a transparent way with the public as well. We haven't determined exactly what platform we want to use to be able to share that information, but our goal is to share that information prior to October the 17th. Following those discussions and approval for funding for some of those that are conditionally awarded, these are only the businesses that we'll be bringing forward for, funding. We will then enter into those agreements, and those businesses will, again, have to understand what they're signing up for, and then start to provide that ongoing compliance reporting. So hopefully, over the next 30 to 60 days, after October 17th, we're able to accelerate the pace in which we're able to start funding these businesses and these projects but then also ensuring that we're doing our compliance and diligence and oversight. And if for any reason we see that a project is falling behind on schedule or is unable to meet that threshold, ensuring that we are able to either reallocate those funds within the program or reappropriate them to other areas in which ARPA eligible expenses can be deployed. So that's our focus right now, but we have until September 30th, 2026, and any funds that are not deployed before then, we will claw back and ensure that the city of St. Louis has the opportunity to appropriate them before the December 31st and expend them before the December 31st deadline.
Yeah, hopefully it's not the case because that's not a lot of time.
I know.
So-
But our goal was to continue that, ongoing compliance throughout, and again, making sure that we monitor this on a continuous basis.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your answer. It does allow us to have a little more trust in this process. I think when you're talking about that they won't be able to have the money until you're sure that they're able to spend that money, and that really they're applying for they're submitting invoices for reimbursement. So
That's correct.
it's not like for instance the PPP loans that went out from the
Right.
federal government where it was an emergency and they just kind of shoved them out, and then there was found to be a lot of fraud, and we've spent the last several years catching up to those people that didn't use the money correctly. In this situation, we'd like to not have to do that kind of
Exactly.
what I call like after enforcement.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do it a little more responsibly and make sure that we're not even distributing the money until we know that it's actually been spent on what it's supposed to be spent on.
Exactly right. And again, that's why it was important for us to have these one-on-one sessions, workshops, this financial capacity building, all of these different programs for businesses who've never applied for federal funds can understand the requirements, because the last thing that we want to do is conduct undue harm by saying, okay, you qualify, this is an eligible expense, and then you spend the money, and then you're not able to pay it back, and now you're being rather investigated or held liable for things because of, again, lack of ignorance or ignorance of how the program operates and those requirements. And that's why I said also we've had businesses that have been going through this since 2021 that didn't meet the threshold, and they're still operating on a shoestring, and they need support. And that's what those supplemental support grants were about, was to ensure that those businesses that continue to stay dedicated to this process and still didn't meet the threshold, that we supported them and compensated them for the time that they dedicated to the program and that they diverted from the operation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm hearing you say, well, we're not doing this to get people in trouble with the federal government.
Yeah.
What we're doing is this money's intended to help, and so we're trying as much as we can to make sure that it does help.
Exactly. That's been our goal since day one.
And you mentioned there's a certificate of occupancy that'll be part of making sure that they get reimbursed. So you'll be working with the building division to make
Yes.
sure that they are completely.
Yeah, they will have to submit. Yeah, that's correct. They will have to submit the occupancy permit for them to get the last disbursement of funds. We don't want to hold 100% of the funds because that would create restrictions on those businesses to actually complete those projects. So we want to be able to be cognizant of that throughout the process and have guardrails and safeguards in place to make sure that we're monitoring that throughout.
And did any of the facade grants, to your knowledge, go to vacant properties?
Not to my knowledge. I will have to go and look, but those facade grants have not been awarded. So again, not been funded, I'm sorry. They've been conditionally awarded, but not funded. None of those facade grants have been funded. So part of our next step in our due diligence with the compliance team, as well as with our consultants, is making sure that that business is actually an open commercial operating business to receive that facade grant. We did have, in some instances, some businesses that were located at residential units that apply for facade. They were informed that they were not eligible to improve their home because facade dollars can't go towards a residential unit. So we've had instances where you talk through that with that business of you were allocated to a business, the next business.
And making sure that the business that's registered to that address is actually a business that is in operation.
Operations,
and doing
that's correct. Yep.
services.
That's correct. That's correct, Alderman Bowner.
So you hired a third-party consultant to do it initially, and the results obviously left us a little wanting. is there any, and I don't want to dump on an individual here, but I'm just saying, is there any looking back at that
Yeah.
that consultant and holding them accountable?
Yeah, it is. And we've actually had that conversation. Unfortunately, again, when we go through the procurement process, it's our first time managing this program. This is a new contractor, new relationship. We trusted based on our process of procurement that they were qualified to do the job. We trusted based on our process of procurement that they were qualified to do the job. That was NDC Grow America. They conducted the first level of viability assessments, site visits, and based on our initial review and even some feedback from businesses, we actually moved forward with submitting a cease and desist for them engaging with any of the businesses moving forward around the viability assessments because we did not believe their interactions were limited to the grant program. So they offer other products and services, and they were offering those products and services to those businesses. We put forth a cease and desist letter out to them about that and told them that any conversation had to be limited to the scope of the work within the contract. And then following their completion of their initial scope of work, we decided to move forward with a separate third party, Morgan Graves Consultant, that we feel much more confident in, and also having our compliance team working now to provide that additional oversight is going to be critically important. So I feel as though we're going to go back and review those viability assessments that were conducted, and that's why it's important for us to take our time through this process up front before we fund any of those projects. But based on the actual the scoring process, I feel confident. But the viability assessment on the site visits themselves, again conducted by Grow America, we are going to go back and review each one of those and do our own analysis and review on them.
That's good. I think it's kind of alarming to hear that they were offering services. I mean, imagine saying, I'll mark you as viable for this community enhancement grant, and if you contract with me to do the work that the money.
I'm not sure exactly how much went into it, but again, as we were receiving feedback that and confirmation that there was immediate questions about them or advertising or soliciting other products and services, we immediately sent out a cease and desist.
Okay, we'll consider that a lesson learned, and it sounds like you've gone in a better direction.
Exactly,
now.
Yes.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. I really appreciate you being here and providing this update to us today. I think it's important for transparency's sake and of the additional moves that you're taking to be more transparent in this program. This is much needed money. Like I said, delayed way too long. Don't want to see it delayed any further because there are people who really need it. But we are using the staff we have and the resources we have, and I think this has been a challenge that we've given you to carry out. And obviously, some mistakes have been made, but I want to make sure that going forward, I don't want to dwell on what mistakes have been made so much as what we're doing to fix them.
Exactly. Yep. We're committed to it, and again, I am personally, as the CEO of the organization, responsible for these funds to be deployed in a ethical manner. And again, that's why I've committed my team to let's be fully transparent in our reporting. Let's do additional oversight and diligence before another dollar goes out on this program.
Thank you, Alderman Brown. And before I move forward, everybody knows I'm very big on facts and misinformation being spread. So I want to make sure I correct my colleague on one thing that he stated for the media that's here and the public that's watching. My in-laws, the Hubbards, do not own Core Square Village. Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. Thank you, President Richardson, for being here. Wish I could have been there with you. First, I want to just kind of rewind back. This program is something that I'm really excited about, and I'm glad that you're here to kind of clear the air. There's been a lot of reportings on some of the businesses. There's been a lot of questions also from alders even before the reporting. I know I can attest with some of my Northside colleagues. We were getting phone calls left and right when this program was released. And then when the closing happened and like, did I get awarded? Did I not get awarded? And then when the awards actually went out, still to this day, you know, getting questions of why I didn't get awarded and why other businesses did get awarded. And I continue to try to at least tell the people in the 14th award, you know, our role at the board, and this was passed back in a previous administration, and then Alderwoman Clark Hubbard cleaned it up to make sure that there was more people that could tap into this program. But our role was to pass the legislation and allocate the money to this program. Once that went to SLDC, the vetting, the picking of the businesses, alders didn't have any kind of hand in soliciting what business should be picked. That was all on y'all. And we probably helped reach out to see maybe where application was, but for as like actually picking the businesses or the non-for-profits, that was all SLDC. So you being here is very important. I took a lot of notes. Sometimes what is sucky at being at the end of the line is a lot of the questions has already been asked. So I don't have many questions. I will say I do have just some concerns that I've received from people within my ward, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up. First, on the non-for-profit side, I know there's several non-for-profits that, you know, or in my community that do really great work. That was just a little concerned when they seen how some of the bigger non-for-profits was awarded, if not the $2 million, close to it, or $1 million. And then when you look at kind of these more smaller non-for-profits, they didn't really get much. I know they may not have the capacity or staff as some of these big ones, but I think some of them non-for-profits looked at this as they looked at it being tied to the small business, that this would really benefit more the smaller non-for-profits. But when you look at some of the ones that were awarded, I would say at least 5 were awarded like that 2 million, close to $1 million, probably more on that bigger end that have the infrastructure that either do fundraisers that small non-for-profits don't, or have the infrastructure to, you know, fill out an application and make it more whistles and blows. So I just want to put that out there. And another thing that I've heard from some of the small businesses is seeing how some businesses, as you say, there's all these different buckets of money, but some businesses that don't exist yet, that are trying to exist, were granted, why some of the small businesses in the ward that applied did not get support, or if got support, got less money than than businesses that didn't currently exist. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Like I say, all my questions are answered. I think it's important that you came today because after the kind of news blitz in the last several weeks, I appreciate Alderwoman Clark Hubbard kind of also checking her record, letting people know that she recused herself, and kind of that correlation between Carrsboro Tenant Association actually sits in the 14th ward. And I know that as an organization that is made up of the community, it is not one family. And I can, you know, I've had my history, but I will speak on the facts that it's not one family. And I do know some of the funds that that organization is trying to do is actually fix up the community center, so that we can have a viable community center in the community. But I think it's important that you were here because there's been a lot of information out there that needed to be brought to reality. And then the last concern that I do have is, I think what some of my other colleagues also brought up, is I just hope we can get this money spent in a time where we don't have to claw some of it back. I know Chief of Staff Jared came in front of I want to say special committee, Alderwoman Sonier's committee, and talked about how the money had to be reallocated or programmed by October. And after October, we couldn't really reprogram it. So hopefully we can get this money out the door. I know this is the first time ever that SLDC has used funds in this way. So I know this is a learning process for you all, it's a learning process for the city to have to get such large ARPA funds, but I just hope that you know, we don't end up sending any money back to the federal government, and really can use these funds to elevate Northside that have been overlooked for a very long time and help a lot of small businesses in the Northside corridor that could really benefit from that. So I know that was a long spiel, but that is my spiel from the virtual world.
Thank you, Alderman Aldridge. And if it's okay with Chairwoman Hubbard, I want to just address a couple of those thoughts. So part of the application, as it was created in the spirit of the legislation, both the initial ordinance and the subsequent ordinance mentioned community needs, right? The needs that within the communities itself. They need community amenities such as healthcare facilities, such as grocery stores, and those other aspects that actually feed into the community, what the community is missing right now. What are some of those services, even workforce development opportunities? And so as we looked at those larger nonprofit organizations that were awarded the $2 million, it wasn't just focused on that business. It was also focused on how does that application from that entity, that nonprofit organization, meets the need of that community at scale. Do they have the experience of delivering that need to that community at scale? Because the reason why these funds were appropriated to the city of St. Louis was due to the high amount of qualified census tracts that we have within the city of St. Louis. 60% of our geography is in a HUD qualified census tract. And as we were looking to deploy these funds, it's really been focused on supporting those small businesses and nonprofits that create capacity for those businesses, but also for the capacity of those neighborhoods to rise up. And so we trying to be as equitable as possible to disperse funds to some of those small businesses that were creating new amenities, but then also providing a needed service that was missing within that community as well. And so that's how some of those determinations were made around the funding sources for some of those more established larger businesses that have been around for decades. They have the track record of being able to service, that neighborhood itself to meet that need. And it's about rebuilding a more resilient community. And then also being able to, as you talk about community needs, having new businesses move into these areas that, again, are able to provide that amenity, whether they are a small business, whether they're a restaurant, and there's maybe a food desert within that area. How does that business meet that need? And again, we are dedicated, Alderman Aldridge, as you mentioned, to spend this money in a timely manner. Jared, the mayor's office, continuously requests documentation on the status of our ARPA programs. I meet with Jared on a weekly basis, Mayor Jones on a monthly basis around the updates on the deployment of our ARPA proceeds. So they are acutely aware and they're getting this information. And believe me, they stay on top of me every month about getting these dollars deployed in a timely manner. But we also have to be diligent in this process as well.
Thank you. Vice Chair Sanye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, President and CEO Richardson.
How you doing?
I'm just going to start first by just thanking you and also thanking the Jones administration. I think this program has been of a lot of conversation and a lot of controversy even before some of the recent scrutiny. I think the idea of intentionally investing funds into parts of the city that have been disinvested in historically is just actually a new idea and was very much a talking point up until programs like this. It's not actually been done. And so I just want to thank you for being willing to, take that task on and chart down a new path and just acknowledge that I understand that a lot of times when you're doing something for the first time, things do happen, and there are some things you can only learn by doing them. There's no way that you can kind of predict for certain elements up until doing it. So I just want to start by just thanking you and thanking Mayor Jones and thanking the administration for the program and thanking Alderwoman Clark Hubbard and all the other folks that have had a role in getting us this far. I know it hasn't been perfect, but I don't think anytime something happens for the first time, it's perfect.
Thank you.
You're welcome. A lot of my questions have been answered. So the first thing that I really wanted is just if you could just describe, since we may have folks watching at home, since some of my colleagues may be asking about it, what is the additional vetting processes? Can you describe that process a little bit for folks who were denied?
So for those who were denied, we offered again a one-on-one debrief every applicant that was unsuccessful in this process. So if they went through the competitive process and you were unsuccessful, you could schedule a one-on-one debrief at the Northside Economic Empowerment Center. We would sit down and go through your application. We even pull up a map and see if you were 500 feet from a park, right? We go through all of those steps for every applicant to help them understand how they scored in the program. And if there's any discrepancies found, we have a reconsideration process that we go through, that we submit that information to a set of internal parties that would then review that and say, yes, this should have been considered in the initial application. And then we vet that business for funding, just as we would do with other ones, and take it before our board as we have funding available to award them. I don't know if, Lorna, you have anything else to add about the additional compliance review that will be conducted on your end with the viability.
Good afternoon. So with the recent board approval of the 159 unsuccessful applicants, and we're starting that vetting process for them because they still have to be a viable business. And so initially, we would have approached this group as we did all our other program awardees, looking at who was in the top 227 and that already received a viability assessment. Well, we realized we can't do that now. So we're going to send to our consultant, Morgan Graves, all 159 applicant information. They will contact Morgan Graves to set up their viability assessment visit. So my team, as we speak right now, I've divvied up the viability assessments that have already been completed. They all have their tasks to go through, look at the files, because we do have a file, pull them down, look at them, and anything that's questionable, we have one staff member dedicated to contact the business and go out to the site. So we're pretty confident that, as you said, and thank you for saying that, this is the first time, and only when you do something for the first time do you realize people might have alternative motives. I'm not mad at them. I don't blame them. It was an opportunity. But we've got to protect the city. We've got to protect the federal funds because we don't want anything clawed back, or we don't want to have to repay any money to the Treasury. So we're all hands in on the vetting process from this day forward.
Yes, I agree. I would like not a dollar to go back. This is point of a clarification for me. So I know you said that there was 437 businesses who received or have awards pending, but then you said that there was 159 businesses that are going to get conditional supplemental funding, but also that of the 700 applications, only 500 were really eligible. So I'm just a little confused.
So 700 businesses were initially that applied for the program. We had deemed from that first 700, only in less than about 500 of those businesses were actually qualified businesses to be considered with the program. And we really just looked at geography on those around, were they actually within the area, were their business that they were seeking funds for in the area in which qualified per the ordinance. So we looked at it in that perspective. Then we conditionally awarded just over 300 businesses for the stabilization, capacity building, the operational expansion, as well as the community enhancement that were conditionally awarded and taken before the SLDC Board of Directors in June. Now we've added an additional about 159 businesses that were deemed qualified for the program, but did not meet the scoring threshold to receive funding from those competitive programs. And so that was adding an additional 150 or so businesses. We've had some businesses, which I spoke to earlier, that applied for, like Facade, for example, but they're operating their business out of a residential home. They don't qualify. So some of those businesses actually fell off of that process. So right now, to date, we have yes, over 400 and about 460 businesses or so that we will be funding. I got to find that that document again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Have any awards been rescinded?
Yes, we have, well, awards that were made and then rescinded. Again, I gave a couple examples around the residential. We have a couple examples around businesses that, were not able to utilize the funds, didn't meet the amount that they needed to complete the project, or even just having conversations with businesses around, are you in business? Do you have that, be able to pass that clearance with the license collector and collector of revenue? They could not produce those records, so they were not considered viable at the time. And they may have had it before and no longer have a good standing with the license collector or collector of revenue. And if they're not able to rectify that matter, their awards were rescinded as well.
Okay. My last question might be because I wasn't here. So in the original ordinance that gave the bill, it was 37 million that was allocated to Northside small businesses. But then I see here we're talking about 34 million.
Yeah.
Can you?
So about 10% of the funds were appropriated to the administrative costs to manage the program and to monitor the program and do all of the compliance and due diligence that we're talking about today. Hiring people to go and do some of these assessments. But in addition to that, we had a portion of that administrative dollars that we've allocated. We brought it back into the program, that 1.5 million, to support these supplemental awardees. So taking money away from SODC operations to provide support here, and then making up for that from just the regular SODC operations that come through our ongoing management of our 501c4. And so we thought it was prudent and important to provide that support, allocating resources even from our own operations to support those businesses that's dedicated over 2 to 3 years in this program for their time committed to it.
Thank you. Okay, this last question is really from constituents, and just, everything was in the media, it was in the press, and I think one of the things that threw people off is, and again, I'm not saying this is factual because I am all too familiar. I think most of us are of media. Media is not always saying things truthfully, so I just want to give an opportunity to address it. And I think you mentioned it earlier that there was a request for your scorecard to be made transparent to some of the applicants because they were wanting to, I guess, kind of be prepared in their process, but and there was even a sunshine request for some of that information, and then there was a denial of that sunshine request. Can you just clarify, is that how things happen? And if so, what the reasoning was behind not sharing that information?
So it was an ongoing competitive process. As we're still reconsidering awardees through the process, we wanted to make sure that we were not creating an imbalance or unperceived competitive advantage for some businesses. So that was the rationale as we're still going through the reconsideration process. But as a moment in time, again, we do have the discretion to hold those applications back. But I think given the needing to be totally transparent in this moment and some of the scrutiny about the program, I want to make sure that it's all on the table, that everyone can see, the public, the public officials can know that, these were the quality of the applications that we were set to review. This is the information that they attested to, and that information was documented and signed off. So if a business within it said that they didn't have a conflict of interest and they do have a conflict of interest, or they said that they just own this one business, but they own multiple businesses, those things are something that they attested to, and we'd be held accountable once we go through our legal review and also our compliance review overall. So all of those things are being, I's dotted and T's crossed for this program.
Understood. I would say, I think that, at least from my end, the way that I'm most familiar with the scorecards is through our developmental process. And so I think maybe to some residents and some constituents, it's like, well, if you can share a scorecard publicly in this case, and it allows for all of the developers to get an understanding of what we're looking for, then why can't we do the same thing for this kind of process? I know there's other legal things and things that have to be considered, but I would be a fan of sharing whatever
definitely.
scorecard.
Yeah, we're going to so moving forward as we go, we will share the scorecard itself and how the projects were scored. And every project that gets funded, that gets awarded, we will share the score that they received and a description of that business through our transparency reporting. So that will come. But then also every business that was unsuccessful had the right to a one-on-one debrief to sit down with a member from our staff and go through that scorecard and understand why they were unsuccessful. And we made ourselves available to do that with every applicant throughout the process.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
My last question is just for you as a personal reflection question, but I think might be good for people who, as you said, are exhausted, are frustrated, have been neglected for a long time. We're so excited, and obviously these processes are nuanced. If you were to start from the beginning 3 years ago, what would you do differently with this program?
I think it's just ensuring that we take a moment and communicate and reset expectations, right? We had $33 million of funds to deploy into neighborhoods that have been highly distressed for generations. And that's the purpose of the Economic Justice Action Plan, is to ensure that we're removing these barriers and making strategic investment. But we also have to be thoughtful around how those investments impact the future tax base, the future wealth that's created, not just by a singular business, but for the community as a whole. And so I think it's just resetting those expectations with businesses around these or the various components of the program. This is the award amounts. This is how much you can receive up to. And none of those things were articulated within the ordinance. It was not articulated within the subrecipient agreement until we executed it with CDA. And so I wish we could have been more transparent, because we didn't have a full scope or scale of the number of businesses that would apply for this program. In the initial ordinance, we only had 227 when we initially wrote out the application. In the subsequent application, we had an additional 500, almost 500 applications.
Yeah.
And so that's over 700 applications that we received. And so thinking about the overwhelming number of applications that we receive, having a third-party consultant and a staff that's ready to review and provide additional oversight would have been important. But I think ultimately setting those expectations for those businesses, and that's why I'm mostly disheartened personally, because I think there was an unrealistic expectation set that these businesses would receive $2-3 million, $4 million for a business that have only operated with $100,000 of revenue on an annual basis, or $50,000 of revenue on an annual basis. They've seen this as an opportunity to, to make the investment that they always dreamed of, which they should have the opportunity to pursue. But this program cannot make everyone's dreams possible. And so in this moment in time, I really am disheartened the most by those who are disappointed and frustrated that they feel as though they didn't get what they deserve, because that's the last thing, the exact opposite of what we're trying to accomplish at SODC through all of the program services, through the Northside Economic Empowerment Center, through all of the work that we're doing with Home STL, through all of the small grant programs, through the loan programs that we have with Scale Up and Mobilize. I mean, we've stood up almost 13 new programs at SODC, and for just to have this one, which is critically important, be scrutinized in this way, I think it was important for me to stand up and say, hey, we made some mistakes, but we have time to rectify those mistakes and rectify those errors, and we're going to do that. And I'm going to be as transparent as possible moving forward to ensure that the public understands where we are and how we're going to create transparency in the process moving forward and learn from this. As, again, 3 years in this role, and the first time being able to deploy funds through this North City grant program, but we have, 12 other programs that have been highly successful. So I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, but I'm mostly hurt that the businesses feel that an injustice was done to them because they were not able to receive what they feel like they deserve in this one tranche of $33 million to address decades and billions of dollars of disinvestment that's needed for this community.
Thank you, Neil. For me, I think that what you just did is most important. Like you said, just acknowledging where we make mistakes and where we feel short. I think that goes with our communities and the public when people can hear. They were not trying to like double down or lock in. They were like, you know what? Something in this went awry. It looks like this went awry. Here are my solutions for how to fix it. And I'm sorry for what you experienced. I think just the acknowledgement of that, like to me, that's a true leader when we can say, because we're human. We're not avoid of error. So I just really respect you for owning, like, yeah, some things went wrong. There was some learning lessons. Here are some tangible things on how we plan to correct these and move forward in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Did any of the members have any follow-up before we move to my favorite part, public comment? Okay. All right. Madam Clerk, how many people do we have signed up for public comment today?
We have 3 in person and 1 online.
Okay, so 4 people total. I know we typically go 2 or 3 minutes, but since we only have 4 people, let's take them, if it's okay with my colleagues. You all know how important public comment is to me. We possibly take them to 5 minutes, and then we will move forward. If you all have any comments, I will just announce. I won't go through the entire row, but just announce if anybody has any comments for the public. Is that okay? All right. We can call the first person up. What will happen is I'll swear you in, and then you can announce your name, the ward you reside in, and then make your comments.
First, we have not decided or not determined Tamika Steigers or Stegers.
Have to speak on the mic so that the public can hear us. And you can raise your right hand. Mrs. Steigers, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
May proceed.
Okay. Good afternoon. We started in the morning, it's the afternoon. So my name is Tamika Steigers. I reside in the 10th Ward. My business is in the 10th Ward. I am here representing over 100 business owners in North City. We got the word that this was happening, and I made myself available to come here. A lot of business owners are busy this time of day running our businesses. So I am here to speak on behalf of the business owners in our coalition. We formed this coalition around this grant process. I did not receive an award. I am one of the unsuccessful applicants. My business is on Del Mar, Locks of Glory Salon and Spa. And if you know me, you know my business is run efficiently. I completed the application in the most efficient manner. My neighborhood manager said that this was an ideal application. If the mayor wanted to see an example of a great application, she would present mine. But I stand before you today being an unsuccessful applicant. Just wanted to put that out there. I have a lot of questions because I have questions from some of the other members. I've worked and talked with Director Richardson, with Ms. Alexander. I've spoken to my alder lady about this process. I am also happy that I'm part of the reason that we had to go back to the drawing board to redo this bill, because all of our businesses on the south side of Del Mar was left out the first time, and that just wasn't fair. If we're going to say North City, let's be in North City, all of North City. So going back to the drawing board, we had to come back and do this again. And so our businesses were included. We were excited. Reading over the application, it stated Economic Justice Index 1 and 2. Those are the only 2 mentioned on the application. But there were 4 economic justice indices inside of the area. So the application from the jump was very confusing. I want the directors to know that. I want you to walk in our shoes of what we experienced. So we got an application that talked about 2 economic justice indices, 1 and 2. So you would assume that if you returned your application in, you're in one of those indices, correct? But that wasn't correct. There's so much misinformation on this process that, and I've said it before, it's been a horrible process, a horrible process. The fact that the nonprofits and for-profit businesses were lumped together was the first sign that it was going to be catastrophic. We run our businesses totally different. Nonprofits have a certain set of circumstances that they have to do in terms of getting their business license and all of that. There's a difference between nonprofits and for-profit. The state of Missouri separated them. They had a for-profit grant application, and they had a nonprofit. We need to follow best practices. If this is going to be your first time doing something, don't just make it up from scratch. Follow some best practices, okay? So SLDC had $3.7 million to hire help, right? You just established that they're only working with $33 or $34 million because they kept $3.7 million for administration costs. I want to know from SLDC, how much did they use to date to do that, because they needed the help? How large is their team that had the responsibility of taking on such a large task? They can answer those questions when I'm done. But that's important, because if you're going to roll out a program like this, that's very important, you want to make sure you're fully staffed, fully functioned. We went to the Sumner High School and had one-on-ones in March and April. Many of those people, it was their first day of work. They were not properly trained. They told wrong information to numerous applicants. I myself had to point out that the affidavit that they were having us to sign had errors on it. You're making us sign something saying that we chose this and chose that, but there are errors in the document. That is uncalled for. That is not good governance. We talked about the Grow America issue. The praying that they did on the applicants, very unnecessary. Yeah, you sent a cease and desist letter. We're still meeting with Grow America now. Applicants can still meet with Grow America to get this funding, that the capacity grants. They stated that some of the issues were clerical. I get it. You can make a clerical error. So the list, when it came out June 27th, had clerical errors that they've admitted to, right? When you turn in a draft or something to your boss, and to me, the public is the boss. We're the taxpayers, we're the citizens. When you turn in a document that is full of errors, you want to correct it and resubmit it once you notice there are errors. So they put out a document on the 19th. So you can reference the list of applicants from the June 27th list, and you can reference the applicants on the September 19th list. One error was corrected. One error. The rest of them still sit on the list. Why would you continue to turn in bad documents to your boss? You would lose your job.
Sorry, Ms. Stigers, one question from the clerk. Did you want her to continue? We're on 6 minutes almost.
I would like her to finish her thoughts.
Okay. And then also the fact that there's over $400 million was requested from the 700 applicants. That's true, but it's also a setup. Why? The budget that was part of the application asked each person to document what are your needs for a year, what's your payroll for a year, what's your utilities for a year. If you would have simply asked us what we needed, the number may not be 400 million. So it's a smoke and mirror type of situation to say, oh, they asked for so much money because you asked us to. The capacity grants. There are still people to this day that have not received their funds. They attended the meetings, they've turned in documents, and some people don't even know what they need. There is a lack of communication on behalf of SLDC staff to communicate properly and efficiently with the applicants. Emails unanswered, phone calls unanswered. When you show up in the office, there's an attitude like, why are you here? Yeah. And then a question, if applicants won't receive the expansion funds until they complete a project, how are you going to determine how much money to hold for them? How are you going to be certain that the amount of employees that they have will be what they will have at the end? So now you have a potential wasted funds. There was a match requirement in the first bill. It went away in the second. I would like to know how many applicants were awarded after the reconsideration meetings that were had. He said there were about 30. Many of these applicants would not to receive any funds had we not put up a fuss and said that this process is inequitable. There's no justice in it. I can tell you of an instance where we sat in the SLDC office with the business owner and was told that he didn't get funds because they didn't have a budget. And then lo and behold, you go pull out the file and the budget is in the file. How would you feel if you were that person? Had you not decided to come down here and knock on the door and say, what's going on with my application? You missed out on funds because of their ineptitude, is what I call it. What's the revenue of those applicants that were chosen? So we talk about, do you have the wherewithal to be able to take on $1 million project if you've only been working with $10,000 or $20,000 for the last 5 years? There are applicants on the list of the 22 that have not had anywhere close to dealing with $500,000, $1 million, but yet they're on the list. And why is it that only that 70% of the funds are only going to 22 businesses? How can you possibly get us to believe that you want to invest in North St. Louis when you're giving the money to the same usual suspects? Urban League has a budget of over $40 million. $2 million that has been allocated for Urban League can help how many small businesses? And we want to talk about the impact. We want to say spending this 33 or 22 million with these businesses will give $150 million of return investment. What about the return on the investment of helping the small businesses that are going to hire within the community? What about the morale of the businesses that now have no confidence in our government because of the lies, the switcheroos, the misinformation? We can't measure that. Those are things that are important to measure, and it's not just the dollars. If you want to sit up here and say that we've had decades of disinvestment in North City, we have to talk about the leadership. Because the only way you get disinvestment is by poor leadership. So when we say those things, think about who you're talking about over the last decades. Who's been in leadership? So those are just buzzwords that keep us off our game. And furthermore, I think that we brought this to life. We brought this to our alder people, leadership at SLDC, that this process was not fair, it's very inequitable, and there needed to be a stop in the disbursements of the funds. And now we're at this point to where it's critical, because I believe there are people on that list that are not going to be able to utilize millions of dollars by the deadline.
Thank you, Mrs. Stigers. Do any of my colleagues on the committee have any questions for Ms. Stigers? Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you. No questions. I know this is like I said, it's a new process for all of us, and we try to figure it out. But I do want to, I've been following some of the stuff you've been having on Facebook, Ms. Stigers, and I just want to say thank you for continuing to try to stay engaged and to try to figure out how to make this a better process. I've seen some of your videos and I've seen the passion in those videos, and I know that you are not only care about your business, but you, like you said, work to bring a coalition of other small businesses. So we're not always perfect as city government, but I appreciate you for holding us accountable and just appreciate your passion for the work that you're doing to try to make this process better.
Thank you. Also, there's interest on this money that's been sitting for years. It could also be used to help the small businesses.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Ms. Karen Greer.
After Ms. Greer, can you raise your right hand? You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I sure will.
You may proceed.
Thank you. My name is Karen Greer. I am a business owner in North City of St. Louis in the O'Fallon neighborhood. I am one of the business owners that applied for the grant for the for-profit and for nonprofit, as we were told during the application process. I am one of the ones that was not successful. I did complete the capacity building classes and did receive the $5,000 for that. However,
With my ownership on the block of West Florissant in between Adelaide and Alice, I've obtained several LRA properties, properties owned by private owners as well as my own too, where I own 90% of a block that I'm developing in the O'Fallon neighborhood. This continued to be a travesty in the North City, St. Louis, to continue to neglect our neighborhoods that are up and coming. You keep funding the same group of people, the same larger entities, which is crippling our communities. If you take a look at the benign neglect, the YouTube video, it shows and highlights the block that I've revitalized with my own dollars. I pay taxes every year. I've been a block owner, well, a business owner since 2002 until today. And I've been using my own funds. I have been receiving small grants as well. But to not receive this type of funding is devastating for me and the residents in that community. It's systematic. It's historical. It's in your board bill that you are supposed to be helping the historical disaffected neighborhood. You have not done that. You keep filling the pockets of the same people, which makes no sense. And you've put a lot of Black-owned businesses out of business waiting on this process. I wanted to highlight some things. On April 15th of this year, that was the deadline and the cutoff for everyone to turn in everything that they were supposed to in this grant application. Yet and still, you're making conditions and giving extra time for other people to receive larger funds while everyone else that did what we were supposed to do, paid our taxes, have our business licenses, we still get nothing, absolutely zero. There's a lack of transparency with the rubrics during the application process. All of those rubrics should have been disclosed to everyone that applied. However, in my second 101, after I asked for the reconsideration, I was told that there were 2 other rubrics that we didn't know about that went through another process. So if there's transparency, I think that's a lie, because it's a lot of things that's coming out in the media. I am also one of the members of the North Small Business Coalition, as well as Tamika Steigers, and we have 5 other members. But we had meetings with Neil Richardson, Corey Bush, both of their teams, and SLDC. Out of that meeting, we were told that there was rubrics that came out after we did our 101. That should not have happened. There's too many errors that we're paying our tax dollars for everybody that's on their payroll to mess up this bad. Too much money. And somebody needs to be held accountable instead of Black businesses going out of business, right? They need to be held accountable. You have a large amount of funding being put in place for a nonprofit to receive 1.5 for a large parcel of land that is actually owned by the LRA. They've given him, I don't know what the word is, it's consignment. So he does not own that property. He has not been paying taxes on that property, especially during COVID when this funding was released. So I'm not understanding how the businesses and entities that are receiving these funds that were not in business during COVID and really in business when the application process took place. I don't understand that at all. And I've been in business since 2002, and I can't get 1 red cent. That's a major problem. Major problem, and I am a voter. So anybody that's looking at this recording, place your vote for the right politician in your office. Get the wrong ones out, because they making too many errors on our taxpaying dollars, and the generational wealth is not getting down to our kids. I'm a direct descendant of the benign neglect. My parents lived at 2106 Adelaide Avenue. I came back to a community that neglected my family, okay? My family, I had 5 siblings. We had to move out of our 2-family property, which is tore down, and move on the other side, which is still in a neglected community. I was raised in this community, seeing the same thing from the same people that is in office, same type of people that is in office. And I don't understand why y'all don't see this as a problem. You got kids, I'm quite sure you know, is going to grow up through a system, okay? Hope that it don't reach them. I have a lot to say, but it's so hard to really take this time to exhaust this, because this is very, very touching and emotional for a lot of us that has put the time and effort, sweat equity into our business, and to give money to people that if they went to go get a loan for their business or their nonprofit, they couldn't get it. So why would you give it to them? Miss Lorna Alexander, I talked to her specifically about my grant. She told me that it was a no across my grant. There was no second opportunity. Said it on a Zoom recording, not once, but twice. I was part of the sit-in with SLDC, and I mean with the business members at SLDC, where we forced their hands to open up the files. She asked me for information that I emailed her that has a time and stamp date on it, which she said that she did not receive. I had to resubmit and tell her you did receive it. This is the time and the date that's on there. I was scored initially a 23. With two initial, they were checked yes. After she opened up the files, they were checked yes. Then somebody went back and checked no. I have a copy of that. So for me to initially go from a 23, after my reconsideration, it was a 63. 40 points, that's major. How many other people was robbed of those points and opportunities because y'all have favor for others? It's not fair. And when you talk about favor, God has favor. He has the last answer to all of this. And everybody will be held accountable. And I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Do any colleagues have any questions or comments? Go ahead. Vice Chair Sanya.
I just wanted to get a clarification about what you were referencing when you said on April 15th was an initial cutoff date, but then others were given a chance.
Yeah, so when we had the first one-on-ones, where Ms. Steiger was saying that you had new people that was on the SLD staff that were there at these one-on-ones that had never had no experience doing this, that were judging us and telling us, hey, you had to choose between competitive and non-competitive. That was a heartbreaker for me because we didn't know any of those things. We were told that we can apply for both, and which I did. So we had the opportunity to get scored more on our nonprofit side versus the for-profit. We did not have that opportunity because it was cut and it was shut off. So when they're telling us that we had to turn in certain documentation, I had to turn in insurance to my building that I'm still paying on, the taxes, a copy of the deed for the whole entire block that I own. Everything that I've submitted to them, I got it to them before April the 15th. So when the reconsideration came and I sent her additional documentation about the employees that I had because they claimed that they didn't have my enhancement spreadsheet or some information because they're losing people documentation, I just felt like, you know, it's a railroad. I'm sending you information that you asking for again, and it's clearly in the email addressed to her. So I feel like it's personal with some of them that's making these decisions on yes, you get it and no, you don't. To go from a 23 to a 63 is major. And I'm quite sure, let me point out two other things. O'Fallon Park and Fairground Park is two historical parks. I'm smack dab in the middle of both of them and can't get any funding because y'all put a 500 feet restriction. What point, who made that up? This is not a COVID relief package. This is a business development plan that came from the top down. It has nothing to do with helping the historical black neighborhood. This is a development plan that if you look at the map, you'll see that O'Fallon is still in a black hole. Who's gonna fix it? Who's gonna help us fix it? I'm still there, I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Green.
All right, do you have anything to say to any?
So we don't go back and forth like that about that, and in response to everything that you spoke about in detail and not in detail, I don't have any purview over that. I don't have the answers that you clearly have not been able to receive. So my recommendation would be to go to, and I want to make sure because the media is watching some of the things. I don't believe that when you said y'all or that you specifically meant us, because you understand that none of us sitting here made those decisions. What we did was fight for the funding to be put in place to create these programs. And when you said who made that up, I don't have the answer to who made that up. Our role is all the people. And I want to be clear that we don't have to go back and forth about it, especially not publicly, because I commend your commitment to your neighborhood, which I'm sorry, what ward is that in, just for people watching?
This is in the 11th ward, the major money that Urban League out of the 11th ward that hurt so many, that's crippling a lot of nonprofits, just like Rasheen was saying. It's help you giving money to entities that's supposed to help us, but we got to compete against them which we gonna always lose. It don't make sense.
So what I'm saying, even in that comment, again, for the media and everybody that's watching, the comment that you're giving money and things of that nature, we're not taking away from any of our responsibility. I would leave out this room right now and go back over to that board and fight for this money the way I fought for that money that day.
We need
I
you.
absolutely would. But what I'm saying is we have to be clear on our message and clear on what's going on, because if not, people manipulate. And when we talk about smoke screens, some of this is a smoke screen to to make us turn our heads away and be divisive with things that really are in place. But you're right, being here, staying here, calling things out, that is exactly the steps that need to be taken. But we have to move forward factually, right? With the process in place, and the process needs to be corrected, and that's a role that we can play in calling and helping to call out. We have a responsibility to you all as our constituents to do that, but we can't make up stuff. We can't lie to you. We can't show you. We got recordings of all our meetings. You can go back and watch when we had this committee and when we had this on the floor, who supported it, who didn't support it, who fought for it, and who didn't fight for it. And in the process from there, that went to what was stated here today, the different entities that took place in the creation, the implementation, and the selection process for this. So we understand, we hear you. Nobody is here going to trying to be against what you're saying, sis. I'm just saying I want us to make sure that everybody is not moving on manipulated misinformation out here, because that's a waste of time. When we're talking about the time that needs to happen and what needs to happen in time, the time that's spent chasing manipulated, ill-informed, misguided people with information that are able to use the media in spaces that we don't have a responsibility for, could be spent in making sure that we can go back and make the corrections and do the things we need, again, for the money that we all fought for. Some of us didn't, and again, that's you can watch the recordings and see who didn't. But I stand on the people that did, and I'm one of them. So Ms. Green, again, thank you for your commitment to your neighborhood and to your community and to the decades. Like you said, none of us have been in office for decades, not serving in where you're serving. So I want to make sure we are clear on that with the media as well. This is not the last conversation we have to have. The HUD's committee is always open. That's why I said this is my favorite part with public comment. The HUD's committee is always open, as I am the chair. And so anytime you want to come back, we can have open conversation, open dialogue, anytime. My number is everywhere. I mean, we just was together last night. We could have rode together this morning, huh? So I'm just saying, please don't give up. Stay true to yourself, your authentic messaging of what you have going on. And then we are committed clearly in moving us forward here in the spirit of this legislation and of this grant program.
Okay, transparency got to start with SLDC.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Greer. Next we have, I can't make it out, but I believe it's Todd. Are you Todd? Yes. What's your last name, sir? Your last name? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Brother Todd. If you can raise your right hand. Swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I affirm.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Ernst Ill. Live in the 14th Ward, but my company is based in the Ville. And I wanted to come here is because there been some misinformation that was published about my company, and I did not want that to be reflection on a program that's designed to give North St. Louis businesses access to capital. I think it's very important that we understand that this is the first time in the history that I stayed in St. Louis that there were a program specifically designed to empower businesses that has been experiencing decades of misinvestment. And one of the things that was reported is that the Boomerang store is not located at 2917 North Sarah, which was false information because we have an occupancy permit where the store is located at. One of the reasons why you didn't see a sign out there because you have to get an architect to draw the sign up, and then you got to take it to the building commissioner where they got to approve it. Then you got to hire somebody to come pick it up. That takes money. That's the reason why we applied for the grant. And when we did apply for the grant, when you place your information inside the system, they will tell you whether or not you are eligible. Once I found out that I was eligible, I was assigned a manager that came out and viewed the store, looked at it, took pictures. Once the pictures was taken, then the young lady sent me an email and told me that I would have to enroll in what was called an Entrepreneurship Academy, which I did enroll into the Entrepreneurship Academy, out of which it was a 4-week program that taught you about profit and loss, balance sheets. They taught you about things, how to do cash flow analysis, everything you need to understand about a business. That program taught you. And once I completed that program, they gave me a certificate. They gave me a certificate of completion. When I completed that program, then I was assigned to go up to the Urban League. And when I got to Urban League, the skills I learned in the entrepreneurship training program, you had SLDC staff there allowing you to do your budget, put your budget together to be submitted. All these things were submitted to SLDC. And I did not want this to go forward without shedding light that there's been misinformation published about this program. And it's very important that we understand that. But what I don't understand is that you have one business, McCormick and Burns Salazar, who has received $74 million. Totally disregard towards 25 and 5% participation. Totally disregard towards the $1 million budgets when you're over $1 million that you got to have a workforce development plan. Totally disregard to Biden's administration Justice 40 initiative. Totally disregard of empowering schools that the choice neighborhood application requires for the closest school in the neighborhood where he's doing development at should be empowered. Jefferson School is failing tremendously. Do not have to show no accountability. Matthew McBride, who received $2,000 from McCormick and Burns. Nothing published about that. Nothing published about Matthew McBride, who received $2,000 from McCormick and Burns Salazar. Nothing reported in the Post about that. Whether or not did he recuse himself or what happened. Only when it comes to programs about people that stay in North St. Louis, there is a scrutiny. Millionaires are not scrutinized. They should be. Because there is where a majority of our money is going. Millionaires. And I'm saying that if you're going to scrutinize one program, be fair. Be fair about the whole process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Todd. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments for Brother Todd? Okay. All right.
We did have a Miss Lisa Potts.
Oh, Miss Lisa Potts had to leave.
Okay.
She's a constituent and she did email me, so I will forward that email. With that, do we have any other speakers?
No, we have none.
Okay, can we have SLDC come back up first before you answer some questions, and I'm sure my colleagues may have any follow-up. I want to make sure that anybody watching knows where to follow up with you for their questions, because that's not typically how we do it, where people can email or text or call or ask us questions here, and we have it in committee. We have it in written comments, which are reflected publicly in the minutes, or they speak in person or on Zoom. So the things that are emailed by our constituents or anything, where should we direct those to?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the actual, I want to make sure I get it right.
Okay.
You have the hand. I just want to make sure it goes.
Absolutely, please.
The email address for the grant program for any comments or questions is nstl-grant@stlewis-mo.gov.
Okay. Thank you so much. Director Richardson.
No, I just wanted to just make point clear, a point clear here that McCormick Barron Salazar was not an awardee of the program, so I'm not sure there was some maybe confusion about that, but they're not associated with the North City grant program. So I just wanted to provide that point of clarity. And as it relates to the license collector and collector of revenue, you know, as there's an ongoing for every business, depending on the type of industry you in, you know, whether it's a restaurant or a retail shop or, you know, a residential building, you have a different set of requirements for your business license with the license collector and also the taxes that you have to pay and the amount that you have to pay. And so as businesses are going through the process, if their business license did expire, we do give them the opportunity to rectify those matters with the license collector and collector of revenue and any other past due taxes that are owed before any funds are dispersed. I think that was a statement that was made. As it relates to the requirements for properties owned by LRA, we did provide within the application, whether you have an option on a property with LRA or with a private entity, you qualify for the program because you had some sense of site ownership in the property or rights to that property through that option agreement. And then also we had separate rubrics for every one of the programs. So we did not have the same scoring rubric for community enhancement that we have for community, for operational expansion or for the other programs. So that's some of the clarification there. And then we did provide a one-on-one opportunity for every business to come into SLDC and meet with us and hear about their application, the scoring process, and review that with them. And then we also gave the opportunity for businesses who have submitted information where, you know, sometimes they may have, you know, not recognized that they own two businesses that were part of the process. So we let them know, hey, you can't have ownership in two separate businesses that are associated with this program. We wanted to make sure that every person or business entity was only awarded for one grant through the stabilization program or through the community enhancement and expansion. You can marry those two things together. So if a business came in and they said that they owned, we found out that they own more than one business, we did give them the opportunity to choose between one or the other of which business that they want to put forward. But then also if a business had operating agreements, we went back and verified that information too to ensure that that was all rectified and gave the businesses the opportunity to submit that information to ensure, again, that we were being as equitable as possible. And so we can, again, we're going to be as transparent as possible moving forward, sharing those applications and sharing the scoring rubric and how those businesses scored across these different programs. So that's all that I had to state. Alderwoman Clark Herbert through this process, but I appreciate the support, allowing us the opportunity to learn through it. Again, this is one out of the 13 programs that we've managed, but we know this program is critically important to the success of North St. Louis City and appreciate the support from this board and from this committee. Thank you.
Any questions or comments, any remarks?
Clerk Harbert,
Yes, ma'am.
we have Ms. Tamika Steiger would like to ask another question, if so, if that's possible, or?
We typically don't do it like this. It's once we up and go through the in-committee process, and I don't want, here, I'm gonna be very clear on this. I don't want it to look like what somebody's being penalized for being what's the buzzword, tie, that I now give you some kind of preferential order in it. So please send the remarks, the questions, whatever you have, please send them to the email address that was there, that they afforded, and it also here still be captured that you had additional questions that you want to be answered. Thank you. Did we have any written testimony, Madam Clerk?
We have none.
Okay, any announcements, committee members? Okay, all members were present at some point today. It's more than this morning at this point. So with that, I'll accept the motion to adjourn. It was moved by Vice Chair Sanye and seconded by Alderman Cone that we adjourn with the call for previous roll. No objections to previous roll. We are adjourned. Everyone have a blessed day.